Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Beyond Pain podcast with myself, Joe LaVacca, and Joe Gambino. Today we are joined by another special guest. First time we've done back-to-back guests on the podcast, so you know it was probably important, and what they had to say was valuable for all of you, both as patients and clinicians. Today we welcome Grayson Strange, trainer extraordinaire from upstate New York, who has a wonderful grasp on the functional range conditioning system, in which he will talk about extensively, in addition to how he works with clients. And spoiler alert, it's not just about lifting heavy stuff. We hope you enjoy this episode and all future episodes of the Beyond Pain podcast. And if you do, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this episode if you think it would help someone you know. Without further ado, here is episode 17 of the Beyond Pain podcast with Grayson Strange.
Welcome to the Beyond Pain podcast with your host, Joe Gambino and Joe LaVacca. Join the two Joes, two physical therapists, as they discuss how to navigate the uncertainties of pain so you can move beyond it and get back to the activities you love most. This podcast is for Joe, and their guests to share their clinical thoughts and ideas based on their collective clinical experiences. Can this information be for you? Maybe, but we cannot know for sure. Therefore, it is always worth talking to your healthcare provider to make the best decisions in your care before you implement anything on this podcast. And please use common sense.
Welcome back to the Beyond Pain podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Joe Gambino, and I'm here with the lovely Joe LaVacca. You can find us on Instagram at Joe Gambino DPT for me, and for Joey Boy over there at strengthenmotion_PT. You can find this podcast also on YouTube, Cups of Joe _PT there, and we also have an Instagram channel as well, Beyond Pain Podcast. In the show notes, you'll also find that application form. If you are interested in working with either one of us, feel free to fill that out, and one of us will get back to you. And today, we are joined by Grayson Strange. He is the owner of Basis Health and Performance in New York, and pumped to have him on the show. The floor is yours to tell our listeners a little bit more about you.
All right. Well, hello. Good morning. My name is Grayson Strange. My wife and I own a gym business in New York. It's I'm in the gym right now, which is technically just our basement. It's a very small little studio, and most of our business is online now. But you know, we're like burnt out ex-CrossFitters who kind of went from CrossFit into weightlifting, got into the functional range conditioning world, and then just went deep down the rabbit hole of really like realizing that there's a different way to train. And that's what we've been doing now for the last like almost 8 years, I think. Training people. You know, you had a big gym in California, and then with COVID and the wildfires there, we transitioned to online to meet upstate New York, and here we are. We got 2 kids, and man, that's it. That's the overview.
Yeah, that seems like a simple life, Grayson. Simple life. I didn't realize that the gym was also in your basement, because on Instagram it looks anything but small, man. It looks like like this sprawling gym. So you guys are good with angles and everything. I got a lot to learn from you.
Creative lighting. Yeah, I mean, it's like Sarah's down there. She's doing a little workout, but I mean, that was the appeal of the house, is that it did have one. It's like a ranch, so It's got a big rectangle base, and you can rip the walls out. And our goal was like, how can we, put 7,000 square feet of gym stuff into like 1,000 square feet?
Yeah.
Oh, there's my lovely wife.
Right.
They say hi.
Meet everybody. Guest appearance. I love it.
That's right. Double guest appearance.
Exactly.
The strangers are here.
Well, we're gonna definitely get her on the podcast at some point. So
sweet. All right, you're up next.
We'll
You're
get on that
some point, Sarah.
Yeah. But I do have to ask this, Grayson, because I had no idea about this. I popped up in this intro that you sent me. You were a cheerleader for the Nuggets?
I was a cheerleader, for the Denver Nuggets.
I would never have expected that. I need to hear how you got, you have a big background in that? Tell me more about this side of things. I'm also curious to know how this, if it has at all, impacts what you do from a fitness strength perspective.
Yeah, totally. I would love to talk about it. So prior to that, like prior to my college career, I was like not a sports person. Like I like to skateboard and play video games, and sports was just really intimidating. Like I learned how to throw a football when I was like in 10th grade in high school, just out of sheer embarrassment that I couldn't throw a football, you know? And when I went to college, a friend of mine in the dorms was on the cheerleading squad there at Colorado State University is where I went to school. And, we would go to the gym and lift weights together. I was just like skinny. I just wanted to, I lifted weights in high school a little bit. I just wanted to be like a bodybuilder. I just wanted to be jacked. That's all that I knew. I didn't know anything. I did like curls and bench press and I never trained my legs and that was pretty much it. And he was like, you should come try out for cheerleading, man. I was like, cheerleading, like, I had all these perceptions of what cheerleaders were like. And then also it was like, and then you're there to like celebrate sports. These are both, two things that I'm just not interested in at all. And he finally talked me into going to a practice. And, when I got to practice, I realized that like what he was there for was to do partner stunting, to throw girls in the air and try to catch them and do elaborate stunts like that. And I was like, wow, that seems pretty cool. And so I started to do it and I realized how difficult it was. And then I realized like the strength and explosiveness side of it, it's sort of like Olympic weightlifting, except instead of a barbell, you have a person that you're trying to throw around. And I really loved it. I mean, I got really into that aspect of it. Out of all of the other stuff that the cheerleaders are supposed to do, like pay attention to the game, get excited about stuff, I was always really bad at that. Like I just wanted to do stunts and like be in my own little world and not really pay attention to that. But doing that for school, I think I did it for like 2 years in school. I took a break and then I came back. But that third year, the Denver Nuggets were looking to start a co-ed cheerleading squad. And it was actually like a paid job, not like nothing fancy. We weren't making a lot of money by any means, but it was a paid job and it was like a professional sports team. And so, yeah, for 2 seasons, I, traveled between Fort Collins and Denver to go down and practice and do games. And we'd go out and do halftime shows. And we did some cool halftime shows with some, like old school celebrities. Like we did a musical performance with Tone Loc once. I mean, it was really cool. Yeah, so that was the cheerleading thing. I mean, I think, the cheerleading thing exposed me to a little bit of Olympic weightlifting because on the team at school, we had to train with the other sports teams. And then I just really started to see like, this is what people train like who are athletes and who have coaching and all this stuff. And it wasn't just like, I don't know, go to the gym and try to bench press the heaviest dumbbells every time you go to the gym, which is sort of was my approach for a long time. So it was a cool exposure into athletics in kind of a sneaky way that I wasn't expecting, I think.
I actually have a follow-up question to that. Was
Please.
Rocky the mountain lion cool?
I never actually talked to him as a person.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was funny. I mean, I saw him there. Awesome, total athlete, like, speaking of mascots, so the mascot at Colorado State University was an awesome dude and was also like, I had no idea what went into being a mascot, like the work that it takes. It was super impressive.
Yeah, because I think I read an article about Rocky. He's one of the highest paid mascots in like all of sports.
Really?
I think so. Yeah, I think he's doing well. Assuming it's the same person and not just like a cycle of people, and they're not just like combining like salaries of 15 or 20 dudes that are just wearing this.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, I think like to get to that point, they get those people in there, and if they're good at it, I think they stay. I mean, it's sort of. I mean, that's such a specific thing, I think he probably. I don't know. I'm totally speculating, but that's cool though.
Yeah, I just pulled it up because this show is all about facts, Grayson. Rocky the mascot, according to Google, earns $625,000 a year annually.
Wow, that's impressive.
Damn, that's super impressive.
Yeah, I guess he's figured it out. There we go. All right, so all of us need to figure out a mascot for our businesses. And it seems like that will.
Yeah, I don't know if I need to find a mascot for my business, but maybe I need to get into the mascot business.
Maybe there you go. Maybe there it is. Yeah. There be a mascot.
Yeah. We got to get on that. We at least know we would know how to take care of our bodies to make that last.
100%.
That would be cool.
100%.
Right. Well, let's shift gears here. This is we have one question we ask every guest, and we'll start with that one. Is how do you take your coffee? Because there's a very loose coffee theme on this show. So
coffee.
Why don't we go there and then are you drinking coffee right there, or is that water?
I'm drinking coffee right now. This is I just started doing this like 2 weeks ago. I love coffee. Typically my go-to is like Chemex, but we got a fancy bird grinder and I weigh out the beans and the water and I set the right temperature, and I'm very particular about that because it tastes the best. I just started making, I think it's called Japanese brew. Have you ever heard of this before? You make it with Chemex. I'm really hooked on it. So like years ago, I loved drinking cold brew, but at the current age that I am, my body does not like drinking cold brew. Like the caffeine is way too strong and it just ruins my sleep. So I need like reduced caffeine cold brew. So this is, maybe you should fact check. I don't know. I think it's called Japanese brew. Basically what you do is you take your Chemex, you prime the filter, and then you fill it up with ice. And then you do pour over onto the ice and you get the amounts right where you're like right when you're finishing the water pour, the ice is just melted, and then you basically make it right into like cold coffee. So it supposedly preserves the flavor exactly as it comes out of the filter. It's really good. So I take that with an ice cube and a little bit of heavy cream. That's been my go-to every day. Or I drink hot coffee like that with heavy cream. Oh, no half and half, only heavy cream.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So that's
cool.
It. Yeah.
I learn a lot about coffee from this question from every guest that comes out. Actually, it might be my favorite segment.
Well, Matt, thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
So, Joe, should we hit the big meat of the questions now?
I think we should get into some real podcast.
Real
content
podcast stuff.
at
I think
this
this has
point.
all been real podcast stuff. I think podcast is entertainment first and education.
I think
second,
that's like the fun segment. I enjoy connecting like that. But yeah, let's get into it. I'm really curious about where this conversation will go. So let's dive in.
Yeah.
Sweet.
So, Grayson, as Joe mentioned, we have a lot of loose themes on the show. The main theme is obviously helping people with pain, mainly persistent pain.
Sure.
One of the things I've enjoyed so much, not only hearing about people's coffee orders, has been hearing about, the people that we respect in this field and their own stories with pain and injury. So would you mind, if you're comfortable, kind of sharing what that journey has been like for you? And have you had any significant injuries or moments around a rehab or pain process that has shaped who you are, personally or professionally?
Yeah, I've had a number of them. Yeah, nothing crazy severe, but I think like even prior to the more significant injuries, like just what I experienced from training was all this stuff that I did for years to get strong and feel really capable completely flipped and like started to make me into the most fragile, pathetic feeling person. And it just sort of snuck up on me. It was like all these deadlifts made me feel so strong in the gym. And now I bend over to pick up an empty box or tie my shoes and I like throw my back out and I'm crippled for 2 weeks and Sarah has to help me put my pants on and stuff like that. So, that was really that time, which was right when I turned 30 pretty much, where I was just like, something needs to be figured out. Like, I don't know what's happening here, but I need to do something different. And I really didn't know what that was. It was sort of like, well, I'll just do less CrossFit and I'll just do Olympic weightlifting. Like, well, that's also intense, It's like, well, I'll just take more time off. All these things that just really didn't work, but led me to finding FRC. Now, fortunately, pretty much all my significant injuries have all happened post FRC. So I had a completely different approach, which was wonderful. But, when my oldest daughter, she was like a year old, I was still riding my motorcycle, which doesn't get ridden anymore. But I crashed. I landed on my head and my shoulder, and I fully tore my AC joint and partially tore my CC ligament. And it was pretty early into FRC, and I was like, I'm not going to have surgery. I'm just going to, tackle this on my own and try to make it better. And that was my first real experience with my own body, like trying to recover from an injury. And it's there. I don't have an AC joint, and so my collarbone sticks out, but it was really motivating just to see like I'm capable of taking care of this and I can just deal with it. Maybe I don't have to have surgery. So, like 8 weeks of stuff, I was kind of back to bringing my arms over my head and lifting a little bit of weight and feeling like things were getting better. that's probably one of the bigger injuries. I had almost a year later, I had kind of two back-to-back injuries. I broke my wrist trying to do, while sailing, a really heavy Turkish getup. Like I fell back on the floor with the barbell in my hand and like folded my hand back to my wrist. I rehabbed that with FRC principles, and then like almost 8 months after that, I crashed on a one wheel. I don't know, you're very familiar with the one wheel. It's like the board with the big go-kart wheel in the middle, trying to do like a top speed run. I went head first into the ground. I broke that same wrist again. I broke my ribs, got like a pretty severe lung bruise. So I had to do double time on the wrist. And then most recently, last October, I got a partial MCL tear in jiu-jitsu. So those are kind of the big ones outside of, all just the bumps and boo-boos from skateboarding and stuff, but those have been pretty insignificant. So
yeah,
I think that's the
seemed
list.
like they came in like a lot of bunches there for you, like you mentioned, right?
The double wrist
timeline?
was,
yeah.
So let's see, the collarbone was like just the beginning of 2018. It was basically like we had done all this construction at the gym in California. We got it open, and we were like basically like 1 week into classes, and then I tore my ACL. I was like, all right, I'm worthless now for coaching.
Yeah.
The wrist was probably like, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 months after that, and then 5 or 6 months of really getting, like 6 months, my wrist was back. I was like, my wrist is ready to go, and I got that one wheel, and then I crashed again, and then had to start over with the wrist. And then there was a good chunk of like nothing too crazy. Actually, I remember one. I had a really bad finger injury. My youngest daughter was taking a nap. It was after we moved here, and I was standing. I don't know if you could see the yoke behind me. The yoke was like over here where I'm sitting, and I was trying to do like heel elevated front squats on the slant board, and basically went to failure, and I needed to set the bar down. I was like, oh, I'm gonna drop the bar. I don't want to drop this on the floor and wake my daughter up. So I like dropped the bar and tried to catch it, and it was falling. There's uprights. They can't see those uprights. There's uprights on the yoke to put the plates on. So basically there's this metal pole. I go to catch the bar, and the bar lands on top of my finger on top of that pole, which completely crushed my index finger like into hamburger meat. I had to go, I got like 50 stitches in it and had to get it all sewn back up. So that was another one where I was like no index finger, and I had to wear a brace forever. That one needed some good rehab too. Again, you have to use all the FRC goodness on it. Yeah.
I find all these stories interesting because I think social media really presents this also wonderful world. We were saying how we feel all connected. But when I follow you and I follow Joe and I follow some of our guests that, we've had on so far, there's always this notion of, there's no way Grayson ever gets injured, right? This guy never has to deal with any pain or trauma and things like that. So I think it's really valuable to hear that, these things do happen. There was one word that you used when you were describing your injury that I just want to touch on, and it was motivated. Like that injury motivated you to start using FRC principles and things like that. And I'm sure with working with athletes, you've seen maybe that happen both ways. Somebody gets hurt, they're motivated to change, and somebody gets hurt and they're sort of like almost at a loss or frustrated, or they just kind of go the exact opposite route. So either in your story or working with your athletes, what do you think creates that division when you see someone get really motivated like yourself, or the opposite?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think a lot of it is just like the general perception of these injuries, like the sort of the overwhelming or general thought process that you get from everybody. Everybody's like, oh, wait till you get to be my age, and it's like, oh, you got X injury. Well, that's never going to be right again. And, it isn't. And it makes so much sense. Like people get hurt, they have all this downtime, and then they go back and it's like, all right, time to start your activities again. And they're like, it doesn't feel right. It still hurts. And I feel like that's been perpetuated so much that's just everybody's mindset. So depending on what you're doing when you get injured, like if it happens a couple times, it does really feel like, well, this is just going to be this way. I must reside to this is my identity now, this back injury, this knee thing, or whatever that is. And I think, still, I see a lot of people who are like that. And I remember feeling like that in the initial days of like, I just kept throwing my back out and just being like, I don't get it. Like last month I had a PR deadlift, and like this month I threw my back out tying my shoes. It gets better. I had another PR deadlift like 6 months down the road. It's like this up and down that just is, it's hard to reconcile why that's happening depending on your perspective that you're looking at it. And I think that's why. I think that's just the general perception. I mean, even you go out and see medical professionals, it's kind of the same thing. They're like, oh, that's your AC joint's never going to be okay if you don't have surgery on it. And like, of course, surgery is really necessary at times. And there's all these things that are necessary, but it doesn't have to be like that. There's lots of other stuff that can be exhausted before that. And I think most people aren't aware of that. I wasn't, and I think all of us at some point were not aware of all of those options that are out there. And that's, to me, that's the biggest difference, is like, if you don't know what's out there, it's kind of like with coffee, like I drank shit for coffee for a long time. And I was like, ooh, this is better,
Game changers.
Yeah, it's just about that, getting more perspective. And depending on where you are, you may not have that perspective yet.
Yeah, I like that. I think, when we've talked about it a bunch on the podcast, where someone's perspective or what they believe can really impact things. But going back to talking about, what Joe said about, you see everything on social media, you don't think anyone gets hurt. And always, Joe, I don't know if I mentioned this on the podcast before, we probably talked about this. I had a client, and this has always made me think differently since this point, where I was dealing, it might have been the back injury I had, Joe, when I was working at Perfect Stride. And my patient looked at me and she's like, you get hurt? It's like, because I was a physical therapist, right? Like I was immune to pain. But ever since then, it just made me think like, we're put on a pedestal, like almost like, I don't know, right? Like it just can't happen to us. So I do enjoy these stories. And I kind of want to do like, I'm really curious here, actually. You talked about FRC. I don't know if a lot of people listen to this podcast know what FRC is. That's functional range conditioning. That's, all of us on this call, we use it to some degree with our patients as far as things go, or our clients. But I'm curious, you just talked about how you use it for yourself. So you got to talk about how you use it for yourself, or how you use it with your clients that you see. But how do you maybe talk about how do you incorporate those principles specifically to help somebody who's coming in from, because you're more on the fitness side than, Joe, well, I'm still on the fitness side to some degree, but I'm just really curious how you're blending the fitness side of things with the FRC stuff. And when someone does come in with pain, how are you navigating all of those pieces together?
Yeah, totally. Well, that's a great question. Well, for so long prior to FRC stuff, we were really just like, if you just lift weights, you get stronger, you do body weight exercises, whatever. Like exercising is the thing that fixes everybody's problems. And, I always struggled with the fact that there were people who did that and they were like, my shoulders feel amazing just doing these pull-ups, like my shoulder's better. And then you have this other group of people who are like, every time I do pull-ups, my shoulder hurts, my back hurts when I deadlift. And for so long, there was sort of this, well, let's just deadlift less. We'll deadlift higher. We'll just sort of avoid all those things that don't bother you, and then we'll just do the things that you're good at, and we'll just keep doing that, and that's sort of the protocol. So it was just like it was just this divergent point of like, we avoid stuff, we do the things you're good at, that's fine. And then after getting into FRC stuff and having this different perspective, like the whole concept of looking at the individual and just assessing what their body can do, like how much does your shoulder move in just the shoulder joint, like seeing those things and having a method of looking at somebody and not just bringing everybody in. It's like, well, you can't do pull-ups yet, so you're just going to do banded pull-ups. And that being is sort of the simple assessment is like, you use a band, you use assistance, or you don't. But everybody's doing pull-ups too. Maybe this person shouldn't do pull-ups yet. Maybe we need to just give them a better shoulder and find other things that they can train simultaneously and work on those qualities. And I mean, that alone was like something, even though it seems so damn simple, I'm sure if I lived 3 lifetimes in the woods by myself and all I had to do was train, I never would have figured that out. But like now it's like, cool, we just look at somebody. So now, I still am on the training side, but at this point of doing this stuff, it's hard for me to even separate those things because it does come down to performance stuff. It's like maybe you have this shoulder that's super limited and it's been giving you lots of pain and trouble, and you do want to get back to lifting weights and getting stronger again. But those little things in there, whatever that is, like they're not performing well, and we can use these principles to improve the performance of that very specific aspect of anatomy, or we can use it to just, you want to build muscle, you want to get stronger, faster, whatever. So, really like so much of what we do with people, especially in the in-person training, is trying to help them navigate those limitations so they can go back and do those things that they once could and can't now, or that they really want to be able to do and they've never been able to do it. So I don't know if that's really answering the question, but it really is like, I find it harder and harder to separate those things just because everybody's got those things. I mean, I have all these parts of my body that still need that kind of level of training on them, not just doing all the fun stuff that I would love to just show on social media, so yeah, I don't know. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, I always find it interesting you mentioned having this like sit in the woods for 3 years with your own thoughts, really be able to come, with some sort of a process. And for those who are familiar with functional range conditioning or Kinstretch, there's this whole big algorithm of decision making, right? That kind of takes you from one thing to the other. And I always find it hard for me, and I don't know, Joe, if you can relate to, it's like, well, how do I really describe my process and this algorithm in my mind? Because I've never, written box by box, what happens. I just kind of come to these conclusions. So I do think you did a really good job there. I think one of the things that is probably, was a little bit lost on me when I was doing the FRC stuff was that conversation around pain, and how to, really blend those worlds. So when you do have a new client, are you giving them any pain guidelines, the do's and don'ts around it? Do you want them to stay away from it? Do you want them to engage it to a certain point? What's your best advice there?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I talk a lot about that. And, I again, like this is all just from practice and experience, and I really don't know what's right or wrong. It's all anecdotal stuff, right? But when I have somebody come in, especially somebody who has a lot of pain, like say they have pain in their shoulder joints, we're just looking at range of motion in the shoulder, and we look at something to start with, like rotation, looking at what angles does it create pain in those acute areas that they have it, and then like how intense it is. I always try to ask them on like a 1 to 10 scale. I'm like, is that a 10? Is it a 1? Are you just aware of it? And then once we kind of establish a baseline of just movement related discomfort, if there is or there isn't, then we start going into training and finding those angles and sort of borders of where are the zones that we can actually apply some load here, whether passive stretching or isometrics or whatever, and where does that start to cause discomfort? And then what does that discomfort feel like? Is it really, are you feeling like a very acute point? Is it more global? Is it present when you stop the loading? Like, does it linger on? All of those little details I find are really, really helpful. And just even getting them to pay more attention to it. I think a lot of the time, like something that this kind of training made me realize with my own body was I never thought about what was happening too much. It was just sort of like, oh, my back feels weird. And that was it. I never thought about it. It was like, where does it feel weird? How intense is it? Does it linger a long time? If I load it and I feel that low level of discomfort during the load, and then I stop, does it go away and does it stay gone, or does it come back later in the day? I mean, I think those are sort of the questions that I try to ask them and figure out, especially on like the first session when we're training. And then my goal with all of that is to give them a little bit of work that they can go do, like the most minimal amount of work possible. Maybe I try to give them like 5 minutes of homework where they're working within those angles and they're keeping in mind all of those things that we discussed about the sensations that we want and the sensations that maybe we don't want. And again, then it's like we come back. How did all that training go? Were you able to stay within those parameters that we discussed as far as intensity of the pain, stuff like that? How did it all go? Did your shoulder blow up the next day? Maybe. All right. Well, cool. We know that we probably used a little bit too much intensity. Maybe we worked at the wrong angles. But I think if anything that I've learned out of all the time, trying to navigate this giant rabbit hole of the FRC world, at least, that those little details are the things that make the most change when we really pay attention to them and use those as the guidelines. I think like going back to what you said about going into FRC at first, the first thing I was like, this is amazing. This totally makes sense. I'm completely overwhelmed. I have no idea where to start. And so starting again was just sort of like, well, you just put somebody in their end range and you just passively stretch and then you just start loading it. And that's it. It's like, okay, cool. So we're teaching kin stretch classes now, and that's what we're having people do. And again, it was kind of that same thing where we have these people who are like, oh my God, I feel so amazing after doing kin stretch. Like my back has just stopped hurting. We had other people who were like, well, every time I do that 90-90 position, like it hurts, like my hip hurts, my back hurts or whatever. So again, it was that, like, there's some component of this that we're not dealing with at the individual level. It's not like everybody can just, stretch their shoulder and end range and start loading isometrics intensely. There's all that little nuance in there, and those sensations that you were getting and how that feels when you're loading and after, and all that stuff is like, that's the most valuable information to me. And I think that using that is the best way to really make sure that you're getting somebody to do the thing that they're supposed to be doing. Because, like, I don't know, the individual aspect of training cannot be overstated, I think.
Yeah, no, I love how you laid that out for sure. I think I think actually you do a really good job of, like, you don't have like this like specific, but I think the general concept that you just put out there is like exactly what Joe and I do, which is great to hear, because it's like the nice, like, if you have that understanding of like what's okay, what's not okay, and you can build that experience and you can build that with your client and let them understand like pain's okay, right? Like it's not a bad thing to have some pain when you're doing things. You need to navigate that to get better most of the time. But there's definitely a clear point where it's too much, and there's definitely a clear point where you're not loading it enough, and how do you find that middle ground? That's the arts, I think, of helping somebody get out of pain. I think you do a pretty good job of that. So that's pretty cool here.
I appreciate that. I always laugh with people, like, jokingly, if we're getting on the phone and we're doing like a remote assessment, we're like, what are we going to do? And I'm like, well, we're going to train, but we're going to have some really in-depth discussion about all of your feelings, like at a level that you've probably never had to talk or think about it. So this is going to feel like therapy in some ways while we're doing this stuff. And it is really, it's like the amount of discussion that needs to happen with somebody when you're not doing it in person is really, I used to get exhausted from doing that, just because it was like, I need to ask more questions. I need to get them to explain this to me in more ways. And it's, it's funny, but I think that's the most important part for sure.
Yeah, man. Now you're speaking my language totally, Grayson. I mean, I think sometimes I look up, and even I do 75-minute initial evaluations, and I look up and I'm like, oh shit, it's been 72 minutes and we haven't gone to an assessment yet. Well, maybe we'll get that next time. But like you bring up a great point. I mean, yeah, there's physical suffering and mechanical pain, but there's the emotional component of people losing their identity. There's the social component of not being part of the gym, or I've even had people be really part of active families and not feel like they can keep up. And all of these things, magnify, I think, the experience of pain. Not necessarily like, hey, thinking happy thoughts, oh, now I don't have pain anymore. But when that 3, 4, 5 out of 10 pain is magnified, it really just eats at people. It eats at people. So I appreciate that you brought that up.
No, of course. I much respect. I know you guys get it.
So I want to ask this question here, and I want to kind of segue, and like, we're talking about pain here. But Joe and I actually had this conversation, I don't remember how long ago, about like leading reps in the tank, going to failure, things like that. So when should people go to failure? When should people leave reps in the tank? And then kind of keeping that, the theme of like, what happens when someone comes in with the bum shoulder, how we're kind of navigating all these pieces. How do all those things kind of fit? Maybe we can just talk about like how we're programming strength work and all that stuff together for somebody.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I mean, I think, again, like with all this training stuff, I find the longer that I do it, the more I really just say the thing that everybody hates, just like, it just depends. I don't know, and for people who are not as familiar with FRC, there's all these subcategories of functional range conditioning. So the stuff that we do for training is called the internal strength model. And it is very much about, you're allocating time to these different components of your body, your joint space, your nervous system, your connective tissue, your muscles. And when you do muscular work, we're treating it with intensity, with the goal being doing the most minimal amount of volume necessary to create that response, right? Like I want hypertrophy, so I'm going to try to do one set to failure. That's kind of the general principle. Now, like you said, who should do that? I don't know. Turns out all the years that I trained, I mean, I started training lifting weights when I was like a freshman in high school. So I was like 14. So many years of training. And when I first started training with this mindset of like, I'm going to do one set to failure, it took me months and months and months to try to get that right. Like I had no idea what training to involuntary failure actually was. You know, so much of my training was just like, this is uncomfortable, it sucks, and I want to stop. And so I think that one, the component of this is learning what intensity feels like on your body and truly feel what maximal intensity feels like, where you're trying as hard as you can and you're still not able to do it. Like that's something that is a skill that takes a really long time to hone and develop. And so when it comes to, you know, who's appropriate for doing that, it always is so individualized. Like I think, you know, if I get somebody who's experienced with training, but they've never gone to failure, there's a lot of discussion around like, this is what we're looking for with failure. However, we need to determine if that level of intensity is even appropriate on these body parts. So what I like to do with people is like, if they haven't done that kind of training, and a lot of the time they've either not trained to failure or they just haven't done a lot of joint specific type training. I really focus on trying to progress intensity on just the joint specific stuff, like an intensity not going to failure on muscular work, but maybe just intensity on maximal isometrics at some point and gradually progressing to that point. And then I think that the psychological side of going to failure is like, is this something that's even appealing to you to do? Because for some people, they're like, I think about like the way that I felt doing CrossFit. In the beginning, I was young. I was like, yes, I'm going to vomit today from working out. And that was like, for some reason, that was appealing. But that transitioned into like anxiety about seeing a clock. I'm like, oh my God, that clock's counting down. Like I would get this feeling of like, I'm going to have to do something when that clock gets to a certain point. And I hated that feeling. And I think for a lot of people, they're like, I want to work out and I want to feel good. I don't know if I want to feel that, the intensity of trying to squat until I can't stand up anymore, you know? And so I think what we really try to focus on is just trying to educate people on like, on this end of the spectrum, you can train to failure, and this might be the most efficient use of your time, and this might optimize your results because you're sending your body a strong signal to change something, and there's lots of energy left to recover from it. You don't have to do that though. Obviously, we've all gotten strong doing lots of other stuff and just lifting weights. So maybe let's try to do 2 sets, or what sounds right. Maybe you just want to do 3 sets and learn, because I think, you know, the value of the lower intensity stuff, especially for somebody who's not as inclined to use that intensity, is that it's all just giving you information about how you train. You know, it's like you did 3 sets of 5 squats today. On that 5th set of squats, let's talk about what it felt like. Like, could you have done 8 squats on that set? Cool. Let's work on maybe paring that down where we're adding a little bit of intensity, but doing it at a level where you're like not losing motivation to work out. You're not feeling like you can't walk when you leave the gym. I mean, so, you know, I guess that's the best answer. Is my approach is I try to explain to people why we would want to train to failure and what the advantages are of doing that, and then find that right recipe for them. Like even in our program now, you know, we have like put in options of, this is the option when you want to use intensity. If you're not ready to do that, you don't like that, it's scary, it doesn't feel good, it causes issues, like here's the option to use less intensity and learn from that. And they probably start to figure out that there are things that you can do to failure. Maybe you can do this exercise to failure and that feels good and it's enjoyable. You like doing bicep curls and that's a simple one. Your elbows are happy, but maybe we don't need to do deadlifts to failure, you know? So I think that's, again, it just comes down to that, like explaining that there's a lot of individuality to that, and that it, you know, it doesn't have to be that way, but these are the reasons why it's good to do one or the other.
Yeah, I really like the options that you laid out there, like, because people definitely feel safe in one position and probably not the other.
Yeah.
And what I think I've realized with people with pain is they're naturally more conservative, especially when it comes to moving and loading that particular part of their body, right?
Yeah.
So what I've almost started to do is use bicep curls, right? And I'll say, hey, all right, you know what? No matter what, as long as they're not in like, you know, inflamed elbow states, right? But
Totally.
I'll do this with back pain people, right? I'll walk them over to the bar and I'm like, all right, I want you to work to your perception, your rate of perceived exertion of about a 7 or 8 out of 10, right? And I don't give them any context to that. And, you know, they go and they're like, yeah, all right, this is about a 7 or 8. They put the bar down, and I'm like, okay, well, what made you feel like it was a 7 or 8? Describe that feeling for me. And they're like, oh,
Yeah.
they give me an example. And then I go, okay, the next set, I want you to just go until you feel that bar slow, right? So go till you slow. And then they go, and then they're like, that one rep that just wants to slow down. I'm like, cool, that's it. Boom. Oh, wow, we got like another 5 or 6 reps there. What do you think
Yeah.
changed? And then they're like, well, I don't know. Well, like you said, I just went until I slowed down. It's like, okay, well, now we have an idea of like, there's probably maybe another couple reps in there. Now you see what I mean on how important it is for us to maybe think about this with your squat practice, your deadlift practice, your row practice, and everything else is your perceived exertion, especially in the beginning when you're new to this and you're sort of feeling a little bit hesitant, is probably going to be much actually higher than what your body can do. So
Yeah.
that's sort of like a little like journey I put them on. But I do like having this split because I work with a lot of people virtually too, to just be like, hey, if you like this, do this. And if you don't like this, maybe take this route.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I love that. That's awesome. I think it's funny. It's also just funny too. Like, I mean, I think, where we get a lot of people, and it's people who, they want to get back to doing performance related stuff. So we're dealing with funky shoulders and backs and all that stuff. But I always laugh because we do get people in there where like we have the opposite conversation. Like, you can't just do everything at 10 out of 10. You don't need to go to failure on 15 exercises. And it's interesting, like psychologically, how people gravitate towards that. Where people are like, oh man, that was so hard doing, just like you said, doing those curls. And we're like, all right, let's try another set. And like, if you just went for a whole extra minute, but it still felt hard, right? So like, it's all information. I think when I was first trying to do the stuff to failure, I would always like, I'm a terrible self-coach. I love training other people, and I can be totally reasonable, but I just am an asshole to myself. He's like, God, you suck. You can't go to failure. But what I started to realize was like, this is really good though. Like, I wanted to go to failure in this time with this weight, and look what I ended up doing. It's like, well, cool. Now I know exactly how I can improve those metrics, and that works really well with everybody, which is cool.
That's funny. I actually see this a lot. I just want to touch base on this before I ask my question for you. You said you're an asshole to yourself when it comes to training, but I think a lot of people don't give themselves enough grace. I actually been finding myself having this conversation with a lot of people, especially people who struggle to even have consistency in the first place. It's like, well, right now you're not doing anything. And you're like, we put together this plan, and you're trying, like, you're upset that you did like 75% of the work, and you did this for a month, and now you feel this much better. Like, it doesn't matter if you miss that 25%. Like, you need to give yourself that grace. Like, don't be an asshole to yourself, right? Like, give yourself
Seems so
some,
simple.
like, really what matters at the end of the day is if you're moving in the direction you want, right? It's not how many sessions or how many check marks you put, because there are people who go to the gym every day. I don't see it. They're in the same place today as they are a year from now, right? There's no changes that actually happen, right? So I think those are the things that I hope someone takes that away from this episode. But maybe this will be the last question, because I know this is already a episode that's longer than usual for us. But I'm really curious as far as, currently, are you doing like, how do you blend like the traditional, I guess this is my question. How do you like the traditional model of strength training, like when I was working at the college level of sports, right? It's like you're using either percentages of max, you're doing RPEs, it's multiple sets of things, right? And like all those things work really well, right? You can get someone strong. Like I've done it before, and I've been able to put on a whole lot of size and mass and strength gains and things like that. And then I feel like the going to failure, that's like way more of like bodybuilding strategies, right? Like with this higher volume going to failure, like it's very different, right? Like this performance driven. They don't like failure in that environment as much, right? And so how are you blending all these things? We could probably have a whole conversation about this for a real long time. So I'm just like, I'll just leave you with those thoughts and just see where you take it.
Yeah, totally. I'll try to do a brief one. Yeah, I mean, I very much try to follow, again, my interpretation of the internal strength model. It's again, like the FRC stuff. It's so vast. There's so much, everybody's own flavor of it, right? So like I have the strength things that I like. I mean, again, like the only really athletic thing that I'm doing now is is jujitsu. So the rest is just strength training stuff that I like. And I really like old time, like strongman training, that kind of stuff, and body weight stuff. So, what I really focus on is obviously like if it's a squat day, I'm going to try to train the joints that are involved in the squat specifically. And my goal has always been, since doing FRC stuff, is to try to push the intensity on the joint specific stuff at the same level that I would push the intensity on trying to build a stronger squat or bigger legs or whatever that is. So I don't always obviously I don't use that intensity in every session on every single part, but a big focus is like, I want to be able to, use my hip internal rotation. I want to be able to load that to failure. I want to be capable of doing that and have that feel good on my body. So there's always a component of trying to push the intensity on the joint specific stuff. And then, then I really am trying to do that like super minimal volume. And lately even I've really been just trying to pare that down and see what is the least amount of training that I can do to push these numbers and see improvement or add a little bit of size or something like that. And that's pretty much been it. So like when I'm doing like a leg day, if I'm doing squats, I mean, I'll get my hips, my ankles, and my knees, and maybe a little bit of like lumbar training, and then I'll do some kind of squat to failure. And sometimes that is like, I really love like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with like the Steinborn squat, where you're starting with the bar tipped up on the floor and you go down and you do squats like that or something. And I'll do that to failure. Not to get into the really super nitty gritty stuff of the internal strength model, but sometimes I might do 2 sets of leg exercises because I want to train different aspects of stuff. Like maybe I want to do a set for hypertrophy of fast twitch fibers, so like maximal strength or something. And then I'm like, all right, I want some endurance too. So I'm going to do a longer set and do lunges to failure. But my training is really simple in that regard. I mean, I think, what gets shown on social media, I mean, I'm always stuck in that mindset of like, well, this needs to be novel looking, so it tricks the algorithm into thinking that I'm doing something cool. And so sometimes I think the joint specific stuff always looks funky and complicated, but really when I look at my training now, it is simple in that way, where it's like a hip, a knee, an ankle, a squat, cars, controlled articular rotation. Sorry, I'm using FRC lingo. And that's it. And so I'm like, right now I do like 3 days a week of strength work, and I train for 60 to 90 minutes. That's about as much as I can squeeze in for the strength related stuff. And, going back to that, like I'm somebody who is very rigid with how if I get this idea in my head that this is how I'm going to train, and like I am completely inflexible and I suck at adjusting that based on stress, sleep, life, kid, whatever's going on. And so programs for me are really hard to follow because it's like, well, that's the program. And if I didn't do it, I'm a sucky person because I didn't finish what was on the program. I didn't get A through Z, and this kind of training has been really good because it's let me kind of step back and just be like, today you were going to bend your hips and your knees. What should you do to do that? It's like, okay, cool. I plug in a couple things and like I finished with the squat. I can check that box, and it's so much simpler and loose. And that's really good for my mental inflexibility, I think.
Love that.
Yeah.
All right, Joe, we got any other questions or?
I don't. Well, Grayson, it's been a pleasure to have you. I'll give you the floor real quick if there's anything that you want to plug, talk about, how they can find you. I'll get everything in the show notes as well. But take a couple minutes here.
Yeah, totally. I don't, actually, there was a question on the list that you sent me. It was like, what would you recommend for somebody doing mobility work? And I feel like this is a good segue into that, just because perfect. Going into that, like for somebody like me, and I know if there's somebody like me, there's probably other people who are thinking the same way. Like,
yeah,
I need to do mobility work. And so I got to change my whole training routine. And like, anything that this training has taught me is that the smallest amount goes such a long way. And so like, if you're trying to get into mobility stuff, you have a cranky body part, like find help, go see these guys, find me on Instagram, whatever, and find something that you can start doing. And if you start doing 5 minutes of something on that part a day, and it might not even have to be every day, that's probably the most extreme example, but 5 minutes of stuff a few times a week can really be the difference between having a body part that does all the things that you want or a body part that just sucks. So just start. It only takes a little bit. And if you don't know what to do, there's lots of people out here who have really good information. So just go ask somebody. That's the best thing that I could say. Outside of that, I'm on Instagram. Strange Grayson is my handle. It's a picture of my dog wearing sunglasses, and I will never change my profile picture. So if you see that,
I just realized that.
I'm constantly torn with this thing of like, there's these things that you can do on social media to get your stuff seen better. And I'm mentally inflexible. I'm like, I don't want to change my profile picture. I don't refuse to use popular music. There's so many things that I suck at and I just won't change. And so if you see that picture, it is me. I'm in there. There'll be lots of pictures of me, videos of training and stuff, but it's just my dog wearing sunglasses.
That's awesome. That's funny.
The name of our business is Basis Health and Performance New York. We have online programs. We do assessments. We also do in-person training if you're around these parts. And that's it. I'm very bad at plugging myself. I don't know. That's all I got.
We'll do it for you, Grayson. You were amazing.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your time and
thank you guys.
all the information that you were willing to share with us. It was very, very great. I appreciate it.
Of course. It was so nice to be here. It was really nice to meet you guys and talk in person too. I really appreciate it. One of these days, we'll have to come to the city. I could definitely make it down to the city, but we'll have to come hang out. I would love to see your spot too.
Yeah. Anytime, man. You're always welcome. And yes, Saratoga Springs, you said, right?
Saratoga Springs, yep.
Yeah.
I know you do horse racing stuff, but there's lots of that.
Trust me, I'm
here.
always looking to get away from the city. So
cool. Yeah, this is a train. I mean, you could take the train up here. It's a pretty nice train ride.
Yeah, absolutely, man. All right, well, have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you again. Thank you.
Best to you and your family. And thank you. Talk to you soon, brother.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, guys. Take care. We'll see you.